Welcome to The Bell Curve, the podcast for aspiring entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Jake Zapata.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Hittinger. We launched this podcast to help entrepreneurs kickstart their ideas and early ventures.
We're all used to the biopics from titans of industry, speaking from the mountaintops of massive companies, but often miss the authentic stories of entrepreneurs in the trenches, actively climbing the mountain.
Here, we share our stories and those of our esteemed guests, co-founders and executives, breaking down what propelled them to success and how they braved adversity and uncertainty.
Let's jump in. Okay, Steph, so you're the co-founder, you're the chief biz officer at the biotech startup Centivax, which is creating new treatments for COVID and other high-profile diseases. We'll hop into that, but like fun fact, so your company Centivax was featured in the Netflix docuseries Pandemic: How to Prevent an Outbreak. And then basically right now you're raising a Series A.
A lot of money in the bank, regardless.
Finance our offsite retreats.
Love it. But outside of changing the world in biotech, Steph, you're also a published author of the book Building Backwards at Biotech.
I read it.
Which we both thoroughly enjoyed, although I only have an ebook version. You haven't sent me a hardcover. I asked for it.
You ordered an ebook. What do you want for me?
It should be unspoken. I should get a hardcover. I'm a hardcover guy. I'm a hardcover man, you know?
I think Allie bought 2 copies, so I'll gift you one of hers.
Exactly. This all works out. Perfect. So that book breaks down the process for scientists and leaders to launch their own ventures and to kind of dip their toes in the water to understand how biotech entrepreneurship works, right?
Yes, that's right.
And outside of being a published author, you're a frequent guest speaker. You've already mentioned a couple from your alma mater in high school to more renowned institutions like Cornell, U Chicago, and other forums. And you advise multiple biotech startups on business commercialization strategy. All really interesting stuff. Hasn't even begun to really cover the highest notes here, which is in 2022, you and Miley Cyrus shared an award, right?
This is true. It was really exciting.
It wasn't a CMA. It was something very similar though, right?
Yes, pretty much exactly the same thing. Less singing though, unfortunately.
A little bit less singing, though you do have quite the set of pipes. I've heard you in karaoke. So you were named to Forbes 30 under 30 for healthcare. And then it's been all downhill from there. Uphill, downhill, I don't know how to describe it. But that's really led to a lot of awesome opportunities for you, which we're excited to talk about. And more background, you obviously went to the best undergrad alma mater this side of the Western Hemisphere, Cornell University.
Screw Harvard.
You majored in chemistry and chemical biology because chemical engineering really was a little too rigorous, right?
Yeah, I only got a BA. I'm sorry, guys.
You only got like a 4.0 in chemistry. So clearly chemical engineering would have been very difficult for you. And then
only a bachelor's of arts for my efforts, yes.
See, that's the only time you'll ever hear me praise your chemistry relative to chemical engineering, which was obviously my undergrad. And then you went to get your MBA part-time while being a venture investor at the University of Chicago, with concentrations in virtually every major you could get, finance, accounting, and entrepreneurship. You didn't feel like throwing in a quadruple major while you were at U Chicago?
Yeah, I just felt that would be overly ambitious, so I decided to stick to 3.
Okay. You heard it directly from the source here. Jake.
Okay, so on a serious note, Steph is one of the most humble people and high achieving people that we've met. And we are super excited to get a view of how you have forged your unconventional path from being a scientist to a venture investor to a startup executive. So, Steph, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you guys are so sweet. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be your first guest, or maybe one of the first guests.
Yes.
You are the first guest.
This is the inaugural guest interview. So, Steph, we just spent like a whole 5 minutes bantering about your bio. And clearly you have a massive volume of work. How do you juggle everything?
Well, sometimes you have to like be a little overly optimistic about the amount you can get done in a given time period, which occasionally results in like minor lateness. This is a joke. I'm frequently a little late to things, but I like to believe it's because I'm a bit optimistic about what I can accomplish in a given time period. But I guess just to give more practical thoughts, I'm a big user of Apple Notes. So I will usually separate out all of my different things in every week. And I will, when I'm feeling very type A, make a list, like an hour by hour schedule of the week where I slot in where I'm going to do everything. When I was doing business school and had multiple clients and was launching Centivax and writing the book, that was basically the only way to keep functioning. So I pretty much just operated by my Apple Notes calendar. So practical tip for everyone. When I was at Cornell, I was decidedly less type A. I also was a little bit not conventional about the way I did classes. I don't know if I've ever told you. So I was kind of ahead of my time, really, because this was before college classes were on Zoom and you could watch recordings. But I thought to myself, why would I go to class when I could instead not go to class and listen to it later? So I would frequently like make some agreement with a friend who was in the same class. So I did this a lot with like Tori and Melinda and Cassie, who were friends from crew. And they would like voice record lectures. And Mel and I were in the same like human genetics class, and we would alternate. We'd actually coordinate like who's going to class at which time. And we'd voice record it, and then we'd listen to all of the lectures later. So I would just like, do my own thing, go to the lab, and then I would listen to my classes like in the evening and be super focused when I listened to them. So I actually was like learning the stuff and I didn't have to like review that much when it came to the prelims. So I was kind of a pioneer. A lot of kids do that now.
I love it. That's like the most unconventional 4.0 approach I've ever heard.
It's like, yeah,
No, seriously, I seemed like a terrible student.
I also didn't go to class while I was at Cornell and had a very different result.
It's actually a joke because I took like classes I like pitched Cassie on taking like a healthcare policy class, and she was in ILR, so it was like super like not in her major. I was like, it'll be so fun. It's seniors fall. We can take her class together. It'll be great. I didn't go to a single class all semester, so she was like really not happy with me, but she was very faithful and she recorded the lecture every time and would give it to me, and then I got a name in the class without ever having to go.
The power of teamwork, cross-functional collaboration, right there.
How did you get your friends to agree to go to class when nobody wants to go to class and record for you? Did you pay them? Would you feed them? Like, how did that go down?
No, that's a great, very insightful question. So the trick here is to kind of find your standard Cornell pre-med type A student that was going to be there, was already going to sit in the front row where you get like kind of maximum audio quality. And then you say, hey, Tori, it would be great if you went to class and while you were there, you recorded it so that I didn't have to go to class. And I think that would be a good deal for both of us because you could, help me by giving me this recording and I won't be distracting you during the lecture by talking to you. So it was kind of like a mutual benefit, like what's it called, Tom, in negotiations where you're like
symbiotic relationship.
Yes, also that. So
that's
really
so
that was
nerdy.
that was how I didn't go to class in college, but still did pretty well.
That's very entrepreneurial of you. Now I know why people like give y'all money. If you just apply that to other stuff, it's like, if you give us money, we'll just make you super rich. And it's like really easy.
Exactly.
You're talking to venture investors. It's like, you should give me money because you're already going to give money to someone and I'm here ready to take it.
Exactly. But yeah, I've done like random entrepreneurial things, like at times to get objectives in cases where I really didn't need to entrepreneur my way through something, but yet I did. So that was my entrepreneur. Oh, the other thing I did with grades at Cornell is I very quickly figured out no one really those really try hard Cornell students that were like, oh, I'm taking like 85 credits this semester and like I'm not sleeping. And yeah. So I very quickly realized that was stupid. And I also very quickly realized that like when you say you get a certain GPA, no one ever asks you how many credits it's out of. So my first semester, when I was coming into Cornell, I was super nervous, by the way. I was like, had huge imposter syndrome. So I was like, I'm going to set myself up for success and I'm going to take the minimum number of credits. So I took 12 credits and one of them was orgo. The rest was like kind of fluffy things. Like I did like my writing seminar, and I think I only had orgo as my only real class. So it like gave me a lot of time to hang out at crew and not have to worry about homework. And then I did really well that semester. And so that was kind of my strategy, is I didn't overload on classes and I was really like type A about getting enough sleep every night. I didn't join any sororities or really go out that much or ever. But you know,
I love your use of the word type A, like when something's type A versus when it's not type A.
well, just out of curiosity, Tom, would you call me a type A person?
I would say, so first off, type A has a negative connotation with some people.
Does it?
Yeah,
I think
which is weird to me, you know? It's like A is the best grade. Why is that negative, you know?
he's like, also, can I just add some commentary on that? Tom is the most type A, which I say in a positive way as a descriptor. You're the most type A of all type A people I know. Like if there was further than type A, like an A plus, that would be you.
A plus, not my GPA, your GPA, not mine.
Only in some things. The A plus in my 4 credits of research really came in clutch. So
Oh, that is so classic. That is so classic.
but yeah, I'm curious. Would you describe me as a type A?
Yeah, I'd say you're type A. I mean, you're one of the most high achieving people, full stop. So that I think type A implies drive, you know?
Interesting.
Structure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair. I'm more of like an unstructured person than a lot of people, which is why I'm always like unsure, but I'm definitely not a type B either. So it's, you know, anyway.
You're a pioneer, as Deloitte calls it. We have this business chemistry thing. And every term is very like self-glorifying. It's like you're a driver, a pioneer, integrator. A pioneer is like the professorial, like ideas person, creative, you know, the person who can juggle everything, you know, but who doesn't show up on time to anything.
Right. No, time is not something I'm very good at. My New Year's resolution was to be on time often, and I don't think it's worked out very well, but I still have the best of intentions. I probably will be late to dinner later, Tom, by the way. So there's that. But anyway, not to hijack the interview. What was the question again?
No. All right. So let's just set a foundation really quick for like all
Let's
of our
go for
like
it.
young
Okay.
listeners. So what we do is we like want to create context with who the guest is, and like, okay, if I'm at Cornell, like I kind of want to understand like who you were at Cornell, and then like we'll kind of talk about your trajectory from there. So what was your major, and basically what were you trying to do like right out of Cornell? First question.
So I was completely unoriginal. I wanted to be pre-med. So
Yes.
I was one of those annoying pre-med students at Cornell. I became a little bit more strategic about my approach to things between like high school and college. And then also, as I mentioned, I was a transfer student. So in my first year of college, I kind of got my footing understanding how college and college applications work. So I actually didn't even apply to Cornell out of high school. And I quickly realized that when you're applying to college, the major you declare on your application is actually arbitrary and it doesn't matter. So I originally applied to Cornell as a chem major because I was like, oh, there's like 5 people in the chem major, and no offense, none of them have social skills. So if I show up and like interview and act like a normal person, I have a way higher likelihood of getting in as a chem major than a bio major. That was my calculation. I didn't actually intend to keep the chem major. I thought I would come in and then immediately switch to bio. And then I realized I actually really liked chemistry, so I stuck with it. And it was actually really great to be in a small department because there was like 10 of us. So like all of us got awards at graduation. Like they were like, oh, you're one of like the top 5 chem students. And it's like, great, out of like 15. Awesome. So I think that was the beginning of me starting to kind of entrepreneur my way through different things and be a little bit more strategic, which was not your question, but there you go.
No, I think that helps a lot though, because we kind of want to understand like the mindset of folks who are doing well and doing things a little bit differently. Okay. And then finally, to kind of just finish setting the foundation here, you're high achiever 4.0, awesome. What was your first job out of school, and basically how'd you land that?
So great question, because I was basically a failure in the eyes of Cornell. I was getting all those emails after graduation, like, hey, you haven't filled out your post-graduation survey. Like, how much money are you making? I was like,
Yes.
I don't think you want me to bring your statistics down like this. I was making $15 an hour, just for reference. I was working as a lab tech in a lab at University of Michigan. So without going into detail, as you both know, my life kind of got upended halfway, a couple months before graduation. So I was supposed to go work in a lab at Yale. And I kind of had this whole plan for myself about, okay, well, I'm going to take some time to study for the MCAT, and I'm going to work at Yale, live in Connecticut. I went to high school there, so I have a lot of friends there already. So I kind of had this vision for what was going to happen. And that did not happen, which was good. But then I didn't have other plans, and I was already graduated. So it was, and I had to take an incomplete in one of my senior graduation classes because of this big life event that had happened. And so here I am. All of my other friends had gone off to their, like, you know, Deloitte consulting job and their big Google high paying job. And I'm here like, you know, just trying to get my life together. I don't have a job. I actually haven't officially graduated college. I walked to graduation, but like I still have to take a whole class and all this stuff. And so I ended up like going back to Ithaca over the summer, and I lived with Cassie, who was a crew intern, in her bed because she's a great friend. For like, I told her I'll be here for a week max. Ended up staying for a month while I finished the class. Thankfully for me, because I had this policy of voice recording all of my lectures, I had all the recordings from the semester. So I listened to all of the recordings, studied the class, ended up getting an A in it, but it was an incomplete. So it has like a little asterisk next to it that I took an incomplete. And then I ended up not having a job because it was like October. And I really didn't want to live at home. So I decided I was going to move to Michigan without a job, and I'd figure it out. So for a while, I was actually working as an online ACT tutor for this tiny little company in Connecticut. And I was like barely scraping by. I didn't actually own a bed for a few months. So this was like a joke with my roommate at the time, because I like slept on the living room couch for like a month. And eventually I did get a bed, but I built it myself because that was like the cheapest method. So I like went to Ann Arbor, Michigan has a lot of thrift stores. So I like drove around and like bought pieces of beds. I like bought a mattress off Craigslist. I like put the whole thing together with like a screwdriver, and my roommate was like, what are you doing? Like, anyway, so that was the beginning. And then eventually, after a couple months of doing online ACT tutoring, I got a job at University of Michigan. That was a $15 an hour, working as a lab associate research technician. And that was in January. But I have to say, the 6 months or so between graduation and that were some of the hardest months I've ever experienced. Just like, it felt like everyone was kind of moving on with their lives without me. Like, everyone had their first adult job, they had a salary, they were making moves, and I felt like my life had gone backwards. I wasn't at Cornell, I wasn't a student, I wasn't a grad student, I wasn't in med school, I was just trying to get by. And so that was honestly really hard and also really humbling. I have a lot of sympathy for people who go through periods of like unemployment, because even though I was working a little bit as a tutor, just not having anything to do or any sense of direction and no idea of what I was doing next was really hard.
Wow.
That's crazy. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked about that before. But it was a rough period, because I would like catch up with people from Cornell, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, my like Deloitte consulting job. I make so much money. I don't know what to do with it." And I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Like, I made $10 yesterday."
I was similar to you, where I was making, and we had this joke between Tom Ken and I after graduating. I made $19,000 my first year out of
Oh my gosh.
Cornell, and so I was hurting financially. And so I feel that. And so you go through this like really hard period of time. You're buying beds and assembling beds, like just to live, like, and you're taking advantage of like the generosity of friends and stuff like that to kind of make it. How has that kind of impacted the way you think about things now? Like one of my favorite things to do is like fear set. I think a lot of fear, like big fears that people has, like, what if I lose it all? Like, what if I have to
Mm,
start over?
yeah.
They basically have this extreme failure. But a lot of people haven't like gone through a period of time where they've had to really scrape by and like put it together, especially students at Cornell.
Mm.
You went through that. And how has that kind of shaped your thinking? And does that make you more aggressive now? Like now that you're, more established and you're doing well? Or do you look at that time, was it kind of traumatic and you're basically running away from failure and will do whatever it takes not to go back there?
That's a really insightful question, and I didn't know that either about your first year of college. I don't actually know other people who went to Cornell besides you and me that kind of had that period. Um, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. On the one hand, it's like, wow, I made this like really low salary work. Like I made it work and I scraped by and I did okay. So I think in some senses it makes me a little bit more open to risk because I'm like that was really hard, but it was also doable. And then again, when I left my low but stable salary at the University of Michigan to start like business school and do a consulting business and all of that, it was again kind of a risk. And for a while, if you listen to a podcast, you probably already heard about this, but for a while, I was living in a living room and not making very much money then either. And I had a lot of friends who really thought I was crazy. And at that point, I didn't have health insurance because I wasn't on my parents' health insurance anymore. And I made it work. And it was just a lot less scary for me to do that because I guess I'd done it before. And then I think also just going through a period of directionlessness and knowing that I felt like a complete failure for such a long time. Well, I guess like not that long, but it felt like a very long time.
Sure.
It's just a very humbling experience where it's almost funny to me in a way now that people are like, wow, like you're an inspiration. You really did a great job here. And I'm like, well, if you had seen me in like June of 2016, I'm not sure you would have had that same conclusion. Like I would, had failed to graduate college on time. I like didn't have a job. I was living on a couch, literally. So I think just having the perspective of like, oh, I'm not like that important, or there's not anything that or I'm like very lucky to be where I am in a lot of ways. I think that probably has been helpful.
So you treat it more as, so your reaction is like, I take more risk because I take more risk, there's a lot of upside when you're
Yes.
experiencing that right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely true. I think Cornell people are very comfortable with paths. Like there's, the PhD path, there's the MD path, there's the JD path, there's the I'm gonna go be like join a corporation and climb the ladder. That's a path. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. Like that's great. But I think Cornell people are very afraid to break the mold and to take risks because they're used to achieving kind of, I don't want to say standard because it's not to diminish that at all, but it's more of a standard measure of success. Like, oh, I completed a semester of college or I moved up in the company. And that's a very tangible thing and very safe way to achieve success. But I always say this and I believe it. A lot of times, if you want to make a big difference, by definition, you're going to be trying to do something that someone else has never done before. And that's going to look really different than what other people have done before. And it's also going to be a lot riskier. And in order to have that big impact, you have to be willing to take a risk. And I know you understand that as well with your business. And that's just something I'd encourage all Cornell students and anyone who kind of is afraid to break out of that mindset to consider, is that if you do want to have this kind of game-changing impact, by definition, you have to do something different than everyone else. And that involves some level of risk.
I think it's also being able to emotionally tolerate that period of like directionlessness. It's not really the money that's stressful. It's like not knowing where you're going is like
Yeah.
the most stressful thing. Because it's like
Right.
if I'm making low money, but I know that this is where I'm going, like this is a piece of that path, it's not that stressful because I know what the next move is. But
Exactly.
if it's like, crap, I'm here and I didn't know I was going to be here, or like I'm kind of making this decision to be here right now so I could figure out what my next move is, and kind of create some of that space and time. Some people do that. That's what I did.
Yeah.
It's still super stressful because you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm yes trying to create space and time, but there's also this sense of urgency to figure it out, which
Yeah,
is like
exactly.
these kind of polar opposite things pulling
Right.
against you. However, to your point, if you can learn how to do that, then you really kind of set yourself up to be able to make decisions and kind of make unconventional decisions or hard decisions sometimes to delay gratification now to kind of have like outsized returns later, like mechanically.
Right. Right. And you made me think of something else as well. I think a big part of that period for me, like I already touched on, was it felt like my life had imploded all of a sudden. And I had all these friends who were either back at Cornell, kind of like achieving success in the Cornell bubble, which, I felt that I'd been good at that. And so now I was outside of it and it was a little uncomfortable. And then on the other hand, I had all these friends that were recent Cornell graduates who were killing it at their adult jobs. And I didn't have either of those things. And so I think what I got from that was just, it was very uncomfortable and I felt very left behind. And it was just a time period where I became very comfortable looking different than my friends and realizing that I am not going to do myself any favors by measuring myself against where someone else is or what someone else is doing. And so, even though at the time it's not like I had a clear direction or a clear path, being able to hold that and be okay with it became really important later because it gave me more confidence when I did decide to step out and start a consulting business and everyone thought I was crazy. I was kind of like, well, I'm used to doing something totally different than what you're doing. And even if you think I'm crazy, we can laugh about it, but I'm still going to do it. And I think that's something I definitely developed because I didn't feel that way while I was a student. I was very much like traditional pre-med in probably every other way.
Yeah. I love that you're used to taking risk, facing challenging odds, embracing uncertainty. And I feel like all the things I just described are perfect in the world of biotech, right? Where the odds are against you. The odds are that your drug candidate or therapeutic won't get approved, that it'll have run into some sort of failure. Do you think that's ultimately what kind of drew you into that area, is almost that subconscious like risk tolerance, to say, let's just start a company and see where it goes?
I think those are all really good points. I think that just entrepreneurship in general really drew my attention and excitement because I do have this like excitement, not just tolerance, but objectively, I have probably more excitement than I should around risk. And I find it very energizing to try new things and to take risks. And to your point, biotech is an industry that's full of failure, full of risk, and I definitely thrive in that environment. Like
Yeah.
even just the ups and downs of a startup, like managing cash flow is a huge thing, which it's just not the same as a company where you have a stable revenue source and for sure you can make payroll next month. Not everyone can tolerate that risk, but I can. I find it kind of exciting for better or worse. And yeah.
I love that clearly you're in a position well beyond your years at this point, right? Chief business officer of a company that will definitely have a high valuation, with really, really promising therapeutics in the pipeline. And so you brought up some really interesting points. What is it that you're kind of ultimately responsible for at CentiVax?
So I do oversee all the finances. So I'm in charge of the cash flow, making sure we can make payroll and all of that. On the less glamorous side, on the more glamorous side, I'm helping lead and organizing all of our pitches, our partnerships. I'm thinking through business strategy and working with our CEO to execute on big business objectives and thinking about focus, like which set of experiments is most crucial for us to do next. How is that going to increase the value of the company? How can we strategically think through who we should be talking to and what sorts of partnerships? How should we structure this partnership? Things like that. And then, of course, there's the less fun aspects of financing, which is a lot of building slide decks, writing grants, doing all of that. And I guess just to tie your comment on the position and my years out of school to what we were talking about earlier, well, first of all, titles are often very inflated in startups. So we just want to acknowledge that up front. But I think what is worthwhile for Cornell students to hear, and people who are of a similar phenotype as Cornell students, is that by joining a startup, you are automatically entrusted to do things just by necessity that you wouldn't necessarily be entrusted to do otherwise. So as, you know, a 26-year-old, I was managing a P&L like of multiple $1 million, and you're not typically going to be given that responsibility in a company normally. But because I did do that and I learned those skills, I now have that skill set to carry forward into a new position. And so even if startups isn't for everyone, there is something very beneficial of working at a startup, because you do get to get this experience that is outside of and higher than, in some ways, what you would normally get. Like when I was 23 years old, when I first started consulting, I was literally creating the marketing materials that were going to investors and going to doctors, and pivotal materials that this company still uses to this day at 23 years old. And once you do that once, you are then able to take that skill set and apply it again and again. And so I think that's something I want students to hear as well, is that it's okay to go into a position where you don't totally know what you're doing. Have the confidence that you can learn things. Like it's okay to acknowledge that you've never done this before, but it's, as long as you're willing to learn and you're willing to humble yourself to admit that you need to learn, there's actually a lot you can get out of those opportunities.
I love that. And you're very humble. I mean, Forbes doesn't select folks just out of a hat. So clearly you're doing amazing things. And I'm curious, because the world of biotech, as you know, writing a book about it is not super well understood by the common, non-scientist, right? So what is it that you guys are kind of currently doing? And among all those things, what are you most excited about?
Currently doing at Centevax, or me in general?
Centevax.
Well, we're still raising our Series A. I don't know when this episode will come out, but as of now, the public markets are not exactly thriving, particularly in biotech. So it's a very difficult time to be raising capital. But we've been, having a lot of really good conversations. Last week we were at Bio, and we got to meet with a bunch of big pharma companies and talk about our technology. And what we're most excited about, to answer your question, is that there is a lot of enthusiasm right now because of the COVID pandemic around vaccines that don't require boosters, that can address all future variants. And there's kind of this excitement around our technology that, even though it's been kind of in the works for a very long time, only now is there broad recognition of the need for this sort of technology. So that's super exciting, because a lot more pharma companies are willing to invest in that than were before. And then on the other hand, we're at a great point in our data set where we're just finishing up all the proof of concept data that shows that this works in pigs. And that's kind of the data set you need to carry forward to go into clinical trials, which is the first time you're allowed as a company to test your drug in humans, which is a huge milestone. So we're very excited about all of that.
Love that.
That's awesome. I have like more of a caveman question that I thought was kind of interesting. Like when reading about your company, I heard that y'all are also doing stuff with snake venom, and y'all work with the guy who gets bitten by snakes for a living. So I've known about this guy for a while, actually,
Really?
5 years. Yeah, I've known about
That's
this dude for a
amazing.
while. I binge YouTube, and I've seen him do stuff like this before. And when I found out that you guys were working with this dude, I was like, okay, Steph worked this company. I know Steph. Hopefully she actually has worked with this guy. I want to know what this guy is like. Is he cool? Is he kind of weird? Is he super brave? Does he get scared every time he has a snake bite him? What's that whole experience like? How'd you land the snake bite guy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very fun story. So for everyone who doesn't know, I'll just give a little bit of background there. So there's this guy named Tim. He lives in Wisconsin, Two Rivers, Wisconsin. I actually just bought him flight tickets out to San Francisco for next week. And he started this hobby where he would adopt a bunch of venomous snakes. So like all the most venomous snakes in the world, he flew in and kept them in his basement as pets. And after a while, he realized that it would probably be kind of dangerous were he to get bitten by one of them, because then he would die. He decided that he was going to counteract this ahead of time by doing, have you guys seen The Princess Bride?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in The Princess Bride, there's this whole scene where he's like, you know, has two cups, and it was like, which one did he put the poison in? And then the guy drinks it, and he's like, which cup was the poison in? He was like, it was in both of them. I'm immune to it. I've been like microdosing myself for like years. And then the other guy dies. But he was fine because he was immune to it. And that's a real thing. So Tim decided he would start microdosing himself with snake venom. And so he, even though he doesn't even have a college education, he's like brilliant with biochemistry. He learned all about how to inject himself with microdoses of like the purified toxins in the snake venom. And he wrote down detailed notes of every injection he ever gave. So it was like thousands of injections over 20 years across multiple species of snakes. And what that does is he's becoming immune to it, but the immune system is lazy. And because he's injecting himself with multiple toxins from multiple species, your immune system creates antibodies that can neutralize multiple types of venom. And the reason that matters is because right now, the way venom is created is if you get bitten by a poisonous snake, you literally have to like catch the snake and like bring it in with you and be like, this is the one that bit me, so they give you the right anti-venom. Because right now the anti-venoms they have are species specific. And in addition to that, you have to be in a hospital and get an IV, which is a problem for our military when they're abroad in various locations. You don't always have access to that readily, as well as rural parts of the world where these venomous snakes tend to live. And so, and then also there's a third problem with existing antivenoms, which is that they're created in horses and sheep and animals like that. And your body isn't made to be able to process horse and sheep proteins. And so sometimes people will even die from the antivenom itself because you're having an anaphylactic reaction to it. And so by us taking Tim's antibody libraries, we are creating a universal antivenom that not only can be done via an injection, but it's also human protein, so you're not going to die from an allergy to it. And it would be one antivenom across all snake species. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but generally that's the idea. So that's the background. But he's a really cool guy, knows a ton about snake biology. We call him all the time to ask questions. We're in the middle of panning his antibody library to create this venom cocktail, and it's looking really good. There's like antibodies that he has that work across multiple species of snakes. But the last time we were all in San Francisco together, he took the whole company on a snake hunt behind the San Francisco airport. They had to get special permission. Yeah. He was like searching out venomous snakes. To your point, Jake, if you look at his videos on YouTube, you can see him taking like full-on snake bites. This guy is like almost died a couple times from like taking too many bites too quickly.
Dude, Tim's gonna save the world, and I cannot wait to party with this guy.
Fun fact, you mentioned we already got featured in a documentary about the flu program. We actually got contacted by a filmmaker in California, and he wants to create a film about Tim and the search for a universal anti-venom. So the last time Tim and I were both in San Francisco was for filming. And so that'll take a couple years to come out. But yeah, Tim's about to be a Hollywood celebrity.
Dude, the only image in my brain right now is like that red button that says invest, and it's just like the guy from Shark Tank hitting the button. I was like, invest. Okay, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing what you actually do at Sendavax. So psyched to actually hear the down and dirty on it. Okay, I want to shift topics now. So you're you're girls with Miley Cyrus now. Like, you're like, yeah, B-list celebrity. Like, we're all really proud of you and psyched for that. Okay, so when I hear Forbes 30 under 30, when I found out, I was like, oh crap, like that's sick. When I was reading about it, as much as you can share, like, what's the process like to do
Oh
that?
yeah,
What, give me some behind the scenes, because I think this is kind of
sure.
this whole elusive thing. And like people think you have to be a badass. And I think you do, but I'm sure there's some kind of like way that you do it.
Oh, for sure. So yeah, I mean, my particular process was actually very smooth. I don't know if other people have more steps. Like, if I've heard sometimes you get phone calls and they ask you questions. I didn't have any of that. I actually didn't know I was on the list at all until the morning of. But the way the process works is there's a nomination, usually in the month of September. And you can nominate yourself or you can have other people do it. In my case, I had a couple of the venture partners I'd worked with, they nominated me, and then one company that I had consulted with, whose founder was a former Forbes 30 under 30, he nominated me as well. So I had 3 nominations, and my general guess, this is also me just like being strategic, is that who nominates you really matters. Like, you can probably nominate yourself and it's fine, but it's better to be nominated by people who like are known entities to the Forbes guys. So I had three well-known people nominate me. I helped them write like all the nomination stuff and I asked them to nominate me. They agreed. They were like, okay, send me what I need to fill out. So I like wrote something different for all of them and sent it to them. They kind of edited it a bit and they submitted it. And then the next part is Forbes will like intensely internet stalk you. So I don't know if you found my other website, but I created a website. This is actually kind of funny. I created a website for myself just for the Forbes people. And like I said, this experience is what made me realize I needed to hire someone if I was ever going to do another website, because I was so catastrophically terrible. So I actually paid for a domain name. Like, I own stephaniewisner.com. And yet I was so incompetent at setting this thing up that my URL, like you type in stephaniewisner.com and it auto corrects to stephaniewisner.wordpress.com.com or something like that. Like, it's total gibberish. And like, I don't know how to fix it. But anyway, so I created like a small website that just had like some of the like different things I'd done, like my like vanity website. And I couldn't figure out how to make it more than one page. So it's just one page that you scroll on. I had to have like a college student from Harvard like get on the Zoom call and help me. She's like very generous with her time, so she helps me. But I still like had managed to screw up the URL so badly. She was like, I don't know how to fix this. Like, so it's still like that. But anyways, so they like internet stalked me on that link, and my LinkedIn is not very good, but I'm sure they probably looked at my LinkedIn. I didn't really do very much to it. And then they sent me, I assume they sent it to everyone, but I guess they probably only sent it to some people. I got a Google Doc that was like asked me to fill it out for more information. However, the night that the Google Doc was due was also like the most intense period of my book editing process. Like, my book was about to be due. And so I thought if I saved myself 2 hours for this Google Doc, it would be enough. Turned out that I didn't save enough time. So this thing was due at like 11 o'clock. I turned it in at 11:00. Like, it was very stressful. My roommate was involved because I was like hyperventilating. Like, I'm not gonna get this form in. And here's the other funny part. I didn't realize that this was what it was. It asks you all these random questions for pages and pages and pages, which is why I like wasn't ready. It was like, how would you describe the millennial generation? And I was like, I don't know. Cool, fun. Like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say.
Likes lattes and like modern industrial design.
That's
right. Exactly. Oh, that was really funny. That was more creative than whatever I put. But anyways, I didn't realize that these questions were literally what they would put on the Forbes website. So I like wrote paragraphs. I put like smiley faces in my paragraphs. And then lo and behold, it's literally on my Forbes profile. Like, I have a smiley face on
You
my
just have
Forbes
emoticons
profile.
in your Forbes profile.
Yes,
Love
because
that.
I didn't know they were going to copy paste it. So anyway, I didn't hear anything from them after that. And then on December 1st, when they posted the Forbes list, I got an email that was like, welcome to the Forbes class of 2022. And then I go to my profile and there are all my questions from the Google sheet that I filled out in like 4 seconds because I was just like blazing through this thing, complete with smiley faces and all. So that's the process. I think like for people who are interested in it, I think it's good to like, I was never like planning my life around the Forbes list, but definitely I was aware of it and I always thought it would be a cool thing to do. So something I would suggest to people who are interested is just like reverse engineering it a little bit. So I thought to myself years ago when I was like 22, like, what do you need to be on the Forbes list? And I kind of had this like mental list of things. Like you need someone who Forbes knows to nominate you. So you obviously need connections and need to have worked closely enough with people Forbes knows. So I knew that. You have to be like a co-founder of some kind, and you have to have like other things that you've done in addition to being a co-founder. Because if every co-founder was on Forbes, like it would be like thousands of people. Oh. So I kind of had those like major buckets in my brain. And so even though I wasn't doing anything for the sole purpose of Forbes, I knew that those were things I wanted. So when I worked at Arch, I like had it in my mind, even at the time, like, oh, these would be good people to nominate me should we ever get to that point. And it wasn't for like 3 more years after I met them that I even asked them, but I met them long before that, becoming a co-founder of Centivax. When that happened, or when Jake asked me to be a co-founder, I definitely at the time thought to myself, like, okay, that's like another box checked. And then even with the book, and I freelance write for a couple different platforms, it was in the back of my head even then, like, okay, this is my like other thing. So just if you're interested in Forbes and you're a young person, I think that's like a good thing to think about.
So when you win, do you get like money? Do they mail you a Grammy? Like, how does that work?
So honestly, it's pretty anticlimactic. I'm not gonna lie. I received the honor of being able to pay my own way to go to a Forbes seminar. So I did not do that. I might do that in the future, but at the time I just didn't have time because it was on a Thursday. I also received the honor of having the option to buy $100 bright yellow Forbes sweatshirt that says 30 under 30 across the front. And when I saw that, I had 2 thoughts. Number one, great marketing play by Forbes. Like they're probably making so much money from all the schmucks buying this thing. Number 2, I am judging anyone that buys this. It is super ugly and really obnoxious. Like anyone who wears this, I hate them probably. So I did not buy the sweatshirt and I did not go to any of the paid seminars. So.
Wow. I love that. Like we're already talking about snake hunting, Steph's hatred, pure hatred of sweatshirts.
For yellow sweatshirts. Yeah.
It was like highlighter yellow. I need to find it. It was really ugly. Sorry, go ahead.
Her skills building beds. I mean, I feel like I am learning a lot about you. I love that our listeners will get that same privilege. And then, so you talked about the book. So I know writing a book is kind of taking a passion, a hobby, and then adding a bunch of stakeholders and deadlines to it. So it can be like really stressful for many people. Was it as stressful as I'm assuming it was?
So I think the actual process of finalizing it and getting it into a form where I was like okay with it being published and like standalone and having people read it, that was the hardest part. The part where I would just have to like interview people or like write in my room, like of course there was a discipline to it, but definitely the hardest part by far was getting it all down on paper in a version that I was comfortable with being released. The editing process took probably twice as long as the drafting process.
Wow.
So
who published you? Like, was it?
It's a small nonprofit publisher called New Degree Press. So anyone can publish with them who wants to. So if you guys would like to write a book, I can make the connection. But one thing I'd say, again, I think probably if you're seeing a pattern in our conversation, it's that I'm very strategic, or I'll like reverse engineer kind of like objectives that I want and like think through it. Like the 4.0, I was like, okay, have to like balance my class load by semester so that I have enough time to get like to study enough. Because I'm not like those people at Cornell, which there certainly are many, my brother being one, who can just not study and show up and somehow still do really well. I am not that person. But anyway, with the book, my objective was kind of to have an excuse to reach out to some of the best people in the field and learn from them. And then also be able to have a platform to help other scientists learn business and to learn the drug development and biotech side. And so the book became, and I do enjoy writing, so the book became kind of like a reason to do all of that. And so actually what I've gotten a lot since the book come out, a lot of opportunities, but I'd actually say the most valuable stuff that came out of the book was in the writing process, because I met all of these incredible people and was able to establish a rapport with them. And so I think again, this is another thing that's a bit unconventional. I just turned 24 when I started writing this book, and who the hell am I to write a book on biotech? I'm 24 years old. I've been out of college for like a year and a half. I don't know anything. And I'm reaching out to these people that are top in the field. And so I think a lot of people would think about that project and immediately like disqualify themselves from it. Like, who am I to write this book? How can I even think that like this is something I can do? And maybe it's arrogance, maybe it's not, just being naive, but even at 24, I was like, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna reach out to these people and I'm gonna see what happens. And so few people do that I think that this book has just been able to like help me in ways that I didn't even foresee at the time.
That's fascinating.
Have you actually like invested time outside of the book now to start kind of like actually building an audience? Like, are you building that asset yet?
So, I would actually love your thoughts if you have any, because I get a lot of cold outreach from the book from people. Actually, I was just at the bio conference in San Diego, and I had all these random people coming up to me that were like, oh my gosh, Stephanie Wisner, like, I've read your book. Like, it was so great. I've recommended it to 7 people. Like, you're amazing. Let's connect. And I'm like, my colleague was actually joking. Some guy came up to me and did that. He was like, I think he chopped off a lock of your hair as well as he was walking away. But yeah, I've gotten to talk to a lot of people. So I've actually just wondered if I'm like leveraging those relationships enough. I'm trying to kind of consolidate everything to a mailing list and keep in touch with people, but it's definitely difficult. Yeah, so I would, love ideas on how to continue to build that network. But I definitely have built a network largely unintentionally, and I'm not exactly sure what to do with it, but it's a cool thing that's happened.
I'd love to talk with you with it offline, because I'm thinking about that as well for myself. I think the form that it takes is like collecting basically just contact information for people and then like subscribing them to some kind of like newsletter that I know people would, I don't know, maybe find value from, or like an email just to basically hear from me, knowing that it's like, okay, if I want to actually start mass producing this, they'll share it if I ask them to. With that though, like, I think the genius about the book when I was reading it was that, okay, it reminded me of another Cornell guy who wrote a book, but he did it in the product management space. He's like a product manager at Facebook. It's called Swipe to Unlock.
I've heard of this guy. Yeah.
Parth to Troya. Yeah. Tom, you actually know this guy.
Yes, Parth.
Yeah. And so like he did a really good job. Basically, he was like, I'm building like content on LinkedIn, and then I'm going to write this book. And then he wrote it with like 2 other dudes, or like one other guy. And then what was genius about the book was like, okay, I'm going to give people like an actually simplified view on the front lines of what this is actually like. And if you want to do this, like, read this book first. So I think the genius about your book is I think yours goes a little bit more in depth than his did, which is why I liked yours, because yours basically breaks down concepts a little bit more. Yours is about like, okay, if you want to build a business and like actually get into biotech and like scale this thing and go, like, read this first. Like, this is like the perfect intro. And it's very well written. I was very impressed.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm not a scientist or a biotech person. Like I was an econ major. I also have a BA, like from Cornell, barely graduated. I had to take a
Because the
winter.
art school only gives BAs. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Not everyone can be a bachelor in science. You know?
All right.
Yeah.
You know what? You were in the arts college. Keep going, Jake.
And it was I was like, oh, like I feel like I understand this. I read the book and I was like immediately starting like I come up with business ideas. And so I was like, I'm pretty sure I could come up with some kind of like biotech idea and just run biz ops. And like I'm like a good enough salesperson to recruit other people who actually know how to do this. And I could call myself basically like a biotech founder if I came up with the right idea.
That's amazing.
That was the byproduct of reading the book for me. And so it was like, if this was the aim of the book, like this was very successful.
That's actually great feedback. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thanks for reading it.
That's great. So did you get like an advance for this book? Like, I know you're selling it on Amazon. Like, I don't know how much Amazon of their, I also sell on Amazon. It's brutal. Like how much of the
really
cut
brutal
that Amazon takes from like your products.
Yeah, Amazon's making a lot of money, but I am not. I still have yet to break even on what I spent like hiring editors and stuff like that to make this project. Yeah.
So like, if you want to write a book, how much are you budgeting to do it?
So New Degree Press makes it very easy to get started. They have like a process in place. So Tom, for example, pre-ordered my book like 3 years ago, the ebook version. And which is very kind of him. I'm just roasting him because I can. And so like I front loaded a lot of the costs by doing like pre-sale campaigns. Like my publisher set it up like, oh, if you can pre-sell enough, then you're like allowed to go to the next step of the process. So I like pre-sold to a lot of people who then got their book now, but it allowed me to like pay for some of the publishing costs. And then in addition to everything that came through New Degree Press, I just realized really quickly that like, even though the editing team there was great, I really wanted people that knew something about my field and could think critically about the content. And so I also hired a couple freelance editors who had like previously edited scientific books. And then I hired one of my good friends who's a PhD student who could like think about it like a scientist. And then I just had the help of so many people, including Tom, that were kind and generous enough to read like a chapter or two for me and give me critical feedback. So that was how I did it on a budget. But it was still like multiple $1,000s conservatively. And I have yet to make that much yet. So
if you have 10 grand, you could do this.
I think probably I spent $5,000 or less. And that was me being pretty like aggressive about hiring a lot of freelance editors. You could, if you had a less technical book than me, you probably could get away with not doing that. So wasn't terrible.
I think the only way I would write a book if I use Scribed, which is Tucker Mack's company. So basically you do an hour a week or 2 hours a week or something like that with somebody who actually knows, like, I don't know how to write. So like, I'm terrible. Like I'm a Grammarly power user type of deal, just to make emails make sense. But I think that's like $30,000. So like I'm listening to, like I've looked into it. And so I was like, listening to you was like, 5 to 10 grand. That sounds pretty good. Like if you're like bootstrapping this thing.
Yeah, I did actually have to write the entire thing myself. So everything in that book I wrote. Fun fact, I was an English minor at Cornell. So I actually do like to write. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of writing at Cornell, mostly like creative nonfiction stuff. And before the book, I did a couple freelance pieces as well.
Okay, I have to ask this. So, what's the title of the fictional work you wrote most recently before your actual book?
Fictional work. I probably the thing published in Relevant. Okay, that's not fictional.
Not nonfiction. You wrote fiction, you said.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't published, so a lot of what I write, like that's more, and you got a flavor of this. So the first chapter of the book, the intro chapter, where I'm like starting out, like, oh, I'm in the clinic, and this patient doesn't have any options, and it's kind of a little bit more emotional. That's more of my like fun style. That's what I enjoyed doing. But a lot of that stuff is very personal by definition. So I wrote a lot of it in classes. Like we did the whole thing where you get critical feedback and the whole class reads it, but I published very few pieces that are fiction or creative nonfiction, because a lot of them are very like based off of real things. And it's very transparent if you know anything about my life, who I'm talking about usually. So I have a lot of those pieces. I do share them like with friends and stuff, but I haven't really published very much actually in that regard, but I would love to someday.
The intro of your book is like, so I actually didn't know if your book was going to be good or not. I was just like reading it to prep for the podcast. I was only thinking about skimming it. And then I read the intro and I was so moved. Like when you're like describing the clinic and it's like, oh, she's a young girl, she's dying, she will die. There are not like, there's not a cure for this. And I was like, oh wait, that's like a very hopeless situation. Like she's screwed. Like that's it. It's done. And I was like, oh, I should. This makes it real for me in terms of why biotech is important. Just from that one page story in the introduction, and that's what kind of like kept me going. It was the perfect hook. Even and like I know it was a true story. That's probably was extremely like maybe even semi-traumatic event in your life, because I don't know how much you think about this person, or like I've had a few situations like that happen to me in my life being in the military, but it's those are like the moments that define you almost in a way. And I felt like that was a moment that kind of defined the whole book. Like whoever that girl was, it was like, yo, in my mind is like, yo, this book is dedicated to that girl. And like, this is why this book is important. The people who can start biotech companies and be successful and actually come up with cures. In this case, maybe it's, COVID antibodies or like anti-venom for people who get bitten by snakes, which is a lot of people on an annual basis. Then those are the only two things I know your company does. I know it does more stuff. Then like that's a huge success. And these actually have material impacts in our life. It's not like we're creating like workflow software and we're getting rich off workflow software. And maybe I saved 30 minutes in my day.
That's incredible feedback. First of all, thank you so much for reading and for that feedback. And to your point, like, so that actually was an essay I wrote. So I skipped over this, but while I was working in the cancer research lab at University of Michigan, I worked as a medical scribe part-time. And it was very emotional for me actually to see all the patients that didn't have options and that we didn't have options to give them. And so Jake's talking about kind of the opening chapter in the book where I like go through, seeing this young girl who doesn't have any cures and how basically we have nothing we can do. And it's kind of this hopeless situation. And that essay, that actually was born out of a creative nonfiction piece that I wrote just for myself, just to process, which is what I do, that I just enjoy writing. So I write a lot like that. So I remember I wrote it, I have like a work laptop for my scribing job, and I wrote it like on a blank email to myself, just like processing the emotions of the moment. And like, I remember I showed it to someone at the time and he was like, well, this is like well written and moving, but like, I'm just not sure where you're going with it. Like, because all it was at the time was this snapshot of like things are hopeless. And that was the whole essay. And I was like, well, I don't know where I'm going with it either. But then I always like thought about that experience in the clinic to your point, like why biotech's important and why I cared so much about medical innovation. And when I finally got around to writing the book, it was like, I remembered that I had written that and I went back to it and I was like, yes, this is how I have to start it. Because another thing that's really important to me, and I hope this came across in the book with the intro and conclusion, is that I think like biotech is it's a fun industry. It's exciting. It has novel science. It has cool business. It's fun, but it's also about patients, and it's about making a difference for patients who don't have any options. And I wanted the book to have that focus and to be anchored on that throughout the whole thing. So I wanted to open it like that. And I don't know if you got to the conclusion, but I concluded it like that too, with like, okay, great. Like we read this whole book about biotech. It's exciting. And yet like, there's still so much unmet need out there. And I wanted to anchor it on the patients and the families that need those new cures. So that's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Man, we've covered so much ground. And I love getting to hear your story, Steph, about, just the circuitous path that we often take into positions where you are now in, of being recognized nationally, locally, and presumably, being really happy with the outcome, right? Things come together. That said, if you could change something about your path, would you?
That's a great question. I mean, there's little things that I would change, but I think, or that I would do better. Like, I wish I had focused a little more when I was working in the research lab on like trying to get some level, just greater autonomy and like understanding and dissecting papers. I can understand and read scientific papers, but I wish I had just developed a little bit more like the critical side of reading papers, which is like a small point. But overall, I think that I'm really grateful for my path. Like I look back on, and I made this point in a different podcast, but I think it's important for people to hear. Like the day before the Forbes recognition came out, I was doing the exact same things as the day after it came out. The only thing that changed was people's perspective of me. And I'd been working on those things that I got recognized for years. And a lot of people looked at me and thought I was totally insane, which is fair because some of it was, and it would looked not like a traditional path. And I think like that's a really important lesson to keep in mind. Like I may or may not have gotten that recognition, but what I was doing didn't actually change. It was just people's perspective on what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I think like the way that my path has unfolded has like, at least for me, just been super humbling. Like I know what it feels like to have no sense of direction. I know what it feels like to kind of have your life plans ripped out from underneath you and to build things back together again. And I'm so thankful that I have those experiences because it allows me to appreciate what God's given me now. But it also I think allows me to not put too much stock into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And so if you're going to you've given a lot of advice to our young listeners throughout this kind of episode. But what else would you like to leave them with, in addition to kind of other things you've already imparted?
Let's see. I have lots of general feedback. I'm trying to think if there's anything I have more specific. Well, I think one thing is, I think there's a combination of learning to not think too highly of yourself, while at the same time being able to believe in your potential and your ability to learn and adapt and do things that maybe don't look conventional or that most other people aren't doing. And I think that's a very important balance to strike, because on the one hand, you being humble is, while you're achieving things, is difficult, but it's also so important, because in order for you to see like things you're doing wrong, or to see things you need to learn, or to even take advice from people who are further down the path than you have to kind of have a humble attitude where you don't take yourself too seriously. But by the same token, if you are too humble, quote unquote, and you don't think that you can do things or learn or grow or adapt in something you've never done before, then you're never going to try anything. And so I think to have the biggest impact, you have to hold both of those things together, and really have people around you, like you two, who are my good friends, like who are willing to look you in the eye and tell you, you know what, I see this thing in your life that you're not seeing, you're not addressing, or, I see this other thing in your life that you're doing a good job at, you should do that more. And I think we constantly have blind spots, and it's so important to be able to know if you're kind of doing both of those things together. And I'm very lucky to have so many people in my life who are willing to look me in the eye and tell me when I'm being an idiot. And I've learned with time to take that a little bit more graciously. But actually, a lot of that started at Cornell. I was talking to Melinda this morning. She's my Cornell roommate. And we were laughing because in college, we were two totally opposite personalities. I'm a very rational, logical person. And when I was younger, I basically thought emotions were a waste of time. They're kind of in my way. Other people should not expect me to coddle their emotions because that's a waste of time. And she was totally the other side of the spectrum. She's a very emotional person, was very frustrated that I didn't like, and rightfully so in a lot of ways, but that I didn't like make room for her emotions or is kind of impatient with them. I vividly remember one conversation. She was like, well, I feel like you think my emotions are kind of a waste of time. I was like, yes, I do think that. But it was so good for me because I had to wrestle through all of these, all like that perspective that I had that was kind of unhealthy and not really real. And it prepared me to be a lot more successful later, but it was super hard at the time. We had tons of conflict, but just having a friend who loved me enough that was like, look, like you are not handling this right. And you are not like being loving towards me or other people when you basically act like our emotions are unimportant because you don't experience them yourself. And just being able to kind of hear that, even though it was so painful at the time, has been super good for me. And just likewise, there's things like that that happen all the time that I think have allowed me to grow a lot as a person, but not everyone has friends that are willing to say things like that. So very grateful for friends like you, Tom and Jake, and would definitely encourage any young listeners to be willing to take that critical feedback and think about it as a favor and not as someone trying to attack you.
That's awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on to the bell curve. We would put you in the 99th percentile. You're crushing it. And, I think it means a lot to our listeners and it means a lot to us that you were willing to kind of open the book and talk about things that actually you haven't talked about on other podcasts, and just be a little bit more vulnerable and kind of show, hey, this is the down and dirty. Here's how it actually was for me. And here's how it actually is on a daily basis. I think the big things that people can learn from this podcast specifically is like, hey, kind of like the title, thinking backwards, like to biotech, like you've kind of reverse engineered and you picked, hey, here's my vision. Here's what I want to do. I don't know how I'm going to get there yet, but I'm going to kind of stack the pieces. And when opportunity strikes, I'm going to strike. And you were never afraid to ask for help. You were never afraid to ask for a referral. And you've done a good job kind of recognizing when you're working on a project like writing a book or building a business. It's an excellent platform to actually reach out to people who normally wouldn't talk to you, and expand your network that way, which propels you forward. So those were the big things that I got out of this podcast, and just wanted to thank you for opening the book there. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun that you guys are doing this. I mean, similarly to the book, this will be a great project for you guys to get to talk to people and expand your networks and build an audience. And Jake, I'm definitely taking you up on your offer to talk about strategy. So expect a text. But thank you again for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks, Steph.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph.
All right. I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.